I'm nervous. My name is Tess Moody and I'm from Smithton here on the far northwest of Tasmania. I'm very excited and honoured to be asked to speak today. I'm a member of the Advocates for Change group, recently formed by Engender Equality here in Tasmania. We are a group of women that are passionate about using our lived experience of family violence to bring awareness, education and change in Tasmania. This is my first public speaking gig as an advocate for change, so bear with me if I'm a little nervous and my voice is a little shaky. I have a lived experience of gender-based violence, and after many decades of dealing with the physical, psychological and emotional impacts of my experience, I have found the courage to speak up publicly, and by doing so, I hope I can encourage other victims to find their voice. Most of you have probably read or heard the statistics at some stage, but to be honest, each time I look at these, I am confronted by the level of risk that women face, simply due to their gender. And I struggle to come to terms with the reality of, on average, 1 woman a week is murdered by her current or former partner. 1 in 3 Australian women have experienced physical violence since the age of 15. 1 in 5 Australian women has experienced sexual violence. 1 in 6 Australian women has experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or former partner. 1 in 4 Australian women has experienced emotional abuse by a current or former partner. As well as our gender, belonging to other groups multiplies the risk. Specifically, Indigenous women experience violence at 3.1 times the rate of non-Indigenous women. Trans women experience sexual violence at almost double the rate of the general population, but are less likely to report it. Women with disability and women from low socio-economic backgrounds and rural and remote areas are more likely to experience violence. And geez, even the statistics say just by being pregnant, our risk increases significantly. Carrying our own unborn baby makes us more vulnerable to family violence, and that in itself is hard to comprehend. Most women who experience violence do so in their own home, carried out by somebody they know or love. We are led to believe that our home should be a haven where we can feel safe and protected, yet women every single day fear for their lives in their own home, quite often with their children witnessing the violence and experiencing the trauma and lifelong impacts of doing so. And I know this because I was one of those children. As a child, I grew up in a low socioeconomic class. I witnessed family violence perpetrated against my mother for most of my teen years. Not only did I experience it in my own home, but it was a regular occurrence in many of the neighbouring families. And even walking down my street, it was something I would see regularly. At one stage, the cul-de-sac I lived in, which had 5 houses, there were 3 of them which had families experiencing violence, including my own. I moved out of home at barely 16 years old to escape the violence, but then went on to repeat the cycle of violence in my own relationships. Until in my 20s, I decided I had had enough. After one particular incident, a close friend told me that it was not healthy and I deserved better. And then I realised I had a choice. I married that friend. He's here. Across my lifespan, I have also had direct experience with sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking and discrimination, as many other women have. Ironically, my first job after leaving school was as a legal secretary for a criminal lawyer who defended violent perpetrators. When I was 13, a friend I had in Hobart was murdered by her boyfriend just minutes after I left her house. I have many other stories that I could tell. These are the stories that we see in the media daily. I wish my story was rare, but unfortunately and sadly, it is one of way too many women in Australia. Where I grew up, no one acknowledged or talked about family violence because it was normalised or simply attributed to the guy having too much to drink, or the blame was placed on the wife for just pushing him too far. I never realised until I was older that this was not an excuse for the behaviour. I held my experiences of violence close to my heart until my very late 30s, I'm now 44, for many reasons. Some of the similar reasons that many victims hide their stories: embarrassment, fear, self-blame, trauma, and the deep shame that it had happened to me. I felt that if I didn't talk about it, then it would go away. I believed that not talking about it would mean it didn't happen. I felt if I spoke up about it, then I would feel the responsibility to take ownership of doing something about it so others would not have to go through what I did. The thought of that responsibility felt overwhelming, but after connecting with other women who were passionate about reducing violence and also working as a sexual assault counsellor for a period of time, I realised that by not speaking up, I was doing an injustice to women and children. One night I looked at my 2 young daughters as they were sleeping and realised that if anything, I owed it to them to do everything I could to reduce the risk they have just because of their gender. We need the stories to be told. We need to have a voice and a platform to bring change. And no better people to do that than those who have experienced it and can find the courage to channel that into advocating for others. Being able to do so can provide healing and empowerment in a journey that has often taken away control and choice, but it's still not an easy thing to do. Once I found the courage to step up and share my story, I realised that by doing so it encouraged other women by helping them to see they weren't alone, and by joining in the conversation it is an important part of their healing and taking their power back. It has a powerful flow-on effect. I became part of the feminist movement because it provided a solid framework for the change I wanted to be involved in, and the belief that gender-based violence was caused by a patriarchal society helped me to understand my experience better. I found myself immersed in a group of women passionate about gender equality and reducing the oppression and abuse of women. I became passionate about smashing the patriarchy and eradicating violence against women in any way I could. And I still am. But after many years, I also realised something else. It's this patriarchal system that also has men trapped in a construct of what it is to be a man. And the result is they create victims in their wake. Men are conditioned to believe they should be strong and never talk about feelings, which can lead to higher rates of mental health issues and suicide, substance abuse and violence. Many of these men have also witnessed family violence as children, which has modelled violence as a normal way of being. This toxic masculinity framework creates beliefs that they should be the man, and quite often the consequence of being the man can mean using power, control, coercion and violence to maintain that status. Men commit the majority of violence against women as well as violence against their fellow man. This way of being has to stop, but how do we do this? It may come as a surprise to you that as a feminist and a survivor of violence like myself, would be willing to stand up and say to fix this problem, we need to invest more into the intervention for the perpetrators or potential perpetrators. It seems a little contradictory, doesn't it? Like, shouldn't I just be concerned with helping and protecting victims if I am an advocate for women and also a victim? Believe me, that is a question I've also asked myself many, many times, sometimes at 3 a.m. in the morning. But the longer I'm involved in this work, the more I believe we are still missing the mark. We have come so far with how family violence is viewed and managed in Australia, but we cannot deny that despite the increase of focus on reducing violence, the tireless efforts of advocates and support organisations and funding into family violence in Australia, the statistics are not improving. It is clear that we need to start looking at other ways to address this issue. In addition to increasing the funding and resources for supporting victims and ensuring their safety, I believe more resources, services and support need to go into teaching men and boys less violent ways of being. Not just once they become a perpetrator, but much, much earlier than that. We need a system that provides early intervention for men or boys when they show signs of a tendency to use violence or unhealthy ways of relating. We need a justice reinvestment program at the forefront for addressing gender-based violence, both for protecting victims as well as addressing perpetrator behaviour. A system that collaboratively and holistically addresses the problem to find where we are failing currently. And during this week of events here at Burnie, I'm sure we will hear innovative ways of how we may be able to do this. To quote our keynote speaker and guest author today, Jess Hill, in her book, See What You Made Me Do, quote, "What if we place perpetrators at the centre of our prevention efforts? Domestic abuse is fiendishly difficult to measure, but there is one reliable statistic we could target. At least once a week, one perpetrator kills his current or former partner," end quote. I believe that until society rethinks our current approaches and interventions and invests more focus into helping men and boys to learn other ways of relating, being and interacting, then we will not see the statistics change. Until then, we can continue to try and help victims after they have experienced abuse, violence and trauma, when the damage is already done, instead of preventing or reducing their chances of becoming a victim in the first place. It may be wishful thinking, who knows, but that is truly the change I would like to see. Thank you.